We're going to talk a little bit about a different way that individuals fought back, which was by running away. And one of the interesting things for me, as I founded my tour company and started to do research on kind of the local history here and what that looked like and how to tell that story to people, I came across some information that I found super astounding, frankly, was our connection to the Underground Railroad. Growing up here in Alexandria, talking about Black history, talking about the Underground Railroad and the heroes of the Underground Railroad, such as somebody like Harriet Tubman, I never dreamed that we actually had some connection to that. It was actually when I was creating my first tour, I went to the Black History Museum and spoke with a couple of elders that I knew that were volunteering there just to get some stories from them. And I had seen a book in our special collections library section of the Barrett Library on Queen Street that talked about the Underground Railroad, and it had almost 24 stories of individuals from Alexandria running away successfully with the help of the Underground Railroad. And interestingly enough, when I had a conversation with my elders, I told them about these stories, a couple of them that I read, and they were like, well, I don't think that's true. I don't think we had a connection to the Underground Railroad. And I'm like, do my eyes deceive me? And so it really gave me motivation to not only do the kind of research to make sure that these were authentic, true Alexandria stories, but also gave me the motivation to tell these stories to more people so that we know about our own history. Again, these were elders who have been here in the community, know some of the history, but don't know this specific kind of area. And so I want to walk with you a little bit through some of the history and some of the research, not too much in a wonky way, but and then share some stories with you that we know about. Luckily, we first I'll start off just with a basic primer for folks about what the Underground Railroad was. And it was a secret network of individuals that, frankly, were committed to disrupting slavery as they knew about it and had it happening in their communities. We know that you have both Black and white individuals involved in the creation of the Underground Railroad. Most historians note that the New York Vigilance Committee, which was primarily made up of African Americans, free African Americans, but a number of white leaders, really started to create, up in New York, those connections with others in other cities and towns throughout the Eastern Seaboard. Philadelphia would also have a vigilance committee. And here in Alexandria, we actually had a couple of kind of anti-slavery committees of our own. The benevolent societies here in Alexandria. Edward Stabler, if you've heard of him and his apothecary, he was involved in an early version of a benevolent society. Their focus at the turn of the 1800s was to protect a number of free people, particularly children, from being kidnapped. And the New York Vigilance Committee started in the same way. In places like New York City, the alleyways were places where people traveled a lot more freely than they do today. But as you know, with an alleyway, it's not necessarily the safest place to be. And so what happened in New York, and unfortunately happened here in the city during the early 1800s, is that individuals be bonked over the head and kidnapped. And here in Alexandria, we're a port city. And so if somebody bonks you over the head, it's not too far for them to pop you on a ship and sail away. Unfortunately, we have a couple of stories like that. But the Underground Railroad and vigilance committees were set up to try to keep this, because of course this is illegal. And so some folks say, hey, this is just not within the law. We might have a system of slavery, but there are certain ways that we have to go about it. And so bonking somebody over the head, selling them, is not the way this should be done. And so vigilance committees started to be set up. And many of them started to go farther past that, seeing the need to get rid of slavery. And so they didn't see that that was going to happen in a legislative way. What steps could they individually take? And the Underground Railroad was then formed. As I note here on this slide, the first kind kind of public notice or notification or mention, frankly, of the Underground Railroad is in 1831, when a slave owner basically complains about the fact that he believes there is a organized group that is working against him. How could his slave get away? And when we do the tour, and we have a tour that focuses on the Underground Railroad, that's something that we talk about. Imagine being here in the city in the 1800s. There's no GPS, there's no maps, no real strong maps outside, 5 miles outside of the city. And so if any of us wanted to run away to Philadelphia, how would we get there? We wouldn't know, right? And so having that lack of knowledge, that lack of information would inhibit a number of enslaved people from running away. Even if they had the courage to do so, they wouldn't have the know-how or the direction. And that's where folks involved in the Underground Railroad start to come in. So we find out that there are a number of routes through the eastern part of the United States. As you can see, we've got a big trail that develops in the Midwest. If you ever go to Cincinnati, Ohio, they actually have an Underground Railroad museum where you can learn about how they operated out in the Midwest. But for our purposes, and particularly William Still, who I'll get to next, you can see that the second one to the right is going to be basically the eastern seaboard. And we know that, as you can see, that route runs through Washington, D.C., and as well Alexandria. And that's going to be the route that a William Still, an abolitionist, writes a lot about and gets a lot of information about. I will tell you, we do have knowledge that there are a number of runaways, whether they're connected with the Underground Railroad or not, that are also able to take advantage of the water. Now, us being in Port City, we have a number of stories where there are a number of stowaways and things like that, of people that are able to stow away here in Alexandria and go maybe to the port of Annapolis, or even farther, Boston. Boston is obviously a main port in early America, and so having people stow away and be able to make it that far north allows them an opportunity to find freedom. But as it was, we have a number of conductors, right? Only a handful really get the notoriety. Why? Because this is a secret network. Again, we only know about Harriet Tubman now because of some of the work of the Vigilante Committee. But we know that her focus is very small. She does a lot of her work on the eastern Maryland shore, where she was born and raised. And so she knows that territory, knows the people there. And I raise that, and I usually raise this on the tour, not to diminish her work, but to help folks understand how risky it is for someone to run away. And are you going to trust a random person that's going to say, hey, I'm going to take you to freedom? Or are you going to trust somebody that you may have grown up with, seen growing up, that knows the territory, knows the woods? You're going to put your trust more in her than just a random person that you don't know. But there are those stories of people putting their trust in somebody they have no clue about, that is wanting to do good work and trying to save people. And so it's interesting, the different conductors that come to be when it comes to the Underground Railroad and what their focus is. A lot of Alexandria's knowledge of the Underground Railroad is going to stem from the work of, didn't go forward, hold on. Uh-oh, it's not moving forward. There we go. I was like, something's up, hold on, I was about to talk about somebody and Harriet Tubman's still up there, what's going on? No, it's all right.
As cute as he is.
Right.
It happens all the time.
Okay. The gentleman that we're going to talk about is a man named William Still, this gentleman. Yeah.
Because it was being a little muffled.
Okay.
Just try that.
That better? All right. Okay. technology. This gentleman, William Still, he's going to be the reason that we know a lot about the Underground Railroad here in Alexandria. He's going to be an abolitionist in Philadelphia, and he actually has a pretty interesting story and a pretty interesting motivation to capture the stories of people running away in Alexandria or anywhere on the eastern seaboard. So he grows up one of 5 children in Delaware. His family, his mother and father, are former slaves. His father's bought himself out of slavery, purchased himself, and his mother's run away. His mother's run away multiple times, made it on the second time, and when William is in his early 20s, he moves to Philadelphia for work, but he gets involved with the abolition movement and gets involved with the Vigilance Committee. And wanting to help out, he's actually a self-educated man, and so he knows how to read and write, and so he is put as the secretary of their committee. And as a secretary, he decides that he's going to capture the stories of runaways that come through their office, their anti-slavery office in Philadelphia. And so he starts to do that, and actually his 4th entry into his journal at that time is a man named Peter Still. Peter Still has run away from the South, and interestingly enough, Peter Still is looking for the same man and woman that William Still calls his parents. And so we come to find out that Peter Still is the brother of William Still. And unfortunately, in the first time that his mother ran away from freedom, she tried to take all of her children, was unsuccessful. And so the second time she runs away, she leaves her 2 older children back on the plantation in the South, and is successful. But when she gets to freedom and they have more kids, they never tell their other kids about the 2 that they've left in slavery. And so, by the grace of God, Peter is able to make it to the north and finds himself in Philadelphia, where he runs into his brother that he knows nothing about. And so if you're William Still and this miraculous occurrence comes in front of you and you've just started to write down the stories of people that are making it through your office, you now know what your mission is, to make sure that you capture these stories and hopefully reconnect other families that may have separated for a number of reasons. And so he continues to do this. He does this probably for it's almost about 10 years. And when the Civil War starts, he's able to they start to close up shop, frankly, in Philadelphia. But he keeps all of these notes and all of these stories. And in 1874, publishes a book called The Underground Railroad Records. And in it, it has over 700 stories of people that have made it through their office and where they were, who they came from, what trials and tribulations they saw on the way there. And it's that collection of stories that we dig into, and we find that there are a number of people in Alexandria that are able to get away with the help of the Underground Railroad. And so, like any book nowadays, you can find it on Amazon and find parts and stories of it. And so if you ever wanted to look it up, you can. If you are here in Alexandria, we do have copies of it in our special collections in Barrett Library. So you can see all of the different stories, particularly those in Alexandria. If you are not interested in reading every story, you can go online. There are a couple of folks looking, I believe they got their doctorate at Cornell, that as part of their thesis put all of these stories in a nice little Excel sheet so you can get the details very quickly. So that's also helpful for anybody that loves to do research. So now I want to talk about a couple of stories that are going to emanate from his book. The first story is with this gentleman, Reverend J.P. McGuire. He is going to be the rector of Episcopal High School, and at that time, the Virginia Theological Seminary. They're going to be somewhat a joined organization on Quaker Lane. And as we know, and frankly, the folks at Episcopal High School have started to do their own history and reconciliation about what happened on campus. And as we know, they did have enslaved individuals that were on campus, mainly for the assistance of students. But we do know that staff also had enslaved individuals as well. And the rector is one of those individuals. He actually rents out another slave, a slave that's owned by a young lady or a woman in Old Town. She lives on the 100 block of Cameron Street, 125 Cameron Street. The house no longer exists. That block, if you know that block, has condos and whatnot on it. But luckily, we have the 200 block of Cameron Street that's all original homes and would have looked much like what should have been on the 100 block. And Mary Dade is the woman's name, who's the owner of a man named Oscar Payne. Oscar Payne is rented out, we believe he's in his 20s at the time of our story. And he's rented out to the Reverend to head up to Episcopal. The interesting thing that I like to tell people is that we know, through, frankly, oral history, we know a little bit about the renting of slaves. It's not similar to the sale of enslaved people, where you have a receipt, you understand records, you know how much things cost. But the renting out of something is similar to, shall we say, borrowing somebody's car, renting a neighbor's car, where it's a kind of a more casual business transaction. And we know here in the city, most cities at that time, historians believe upwards of 30% of the enslaved may have been rented out. And that could have been for a project. It could be a domestic project. Maybe you have somebody come over and be a babysitter and watch your children while you are away. It could be here in Alexandria, we know there's a lot of building and construction and labor. And so having somebody rented out or renting out a number of enslaved people for that purpose. We also do know that there are kind of annual leases, shall we say. And that's what happens here with Oscar. He's rented out for a number of years to the rector and to the school. We do know from his narrative with William Still that while he does go to Episcopal, he is solely there for labor. He doesn't have access to books or academia. He's not taught how to read and write. And so he is there, much like others on campus, to keep up the maintenance, to support the work of the school. One of the things that we don't know is how he finds out about the Underground Railroad. Unfortunately, history, there are many gaps in history because we are not there to get those details. And as you all would know, if he is living at 125 Cameron Street and then heads to where Episcopal is today, that's a far cry from the city at that time. I always like to joke with, or not joke, but tell the kind of help people understand that that part of the city is in the countryside in the 1800s. It's not in the city as we know it now, right? Having gone to St. Stephen's and St. Agnes, you have the Lloyd House on the lower school. That's the summer home of the same Lloyd family that has the Lloyd House at the corner of Queen and Washington Street. And so thinking about that part of Russell Road as the countryside and that's the summer home is quite interesting. Did it go out? It is, right? and so this idea that Episcopal is kind of in the city is not a realistic one. And so the communication channels greatly differ on the countryside and in kind of agricultural places than they would in an urban area like Alexandria. Here in Alexandria, early Alexandria, we know the word of mouth spreads very fast. In fact, we're an international port, and so any news we get about anything going on in the world spreads very quickly through community. And so that places a number of challenges on how actually Oscar finds out about the Underground Railroad, because he's not in town. And we don't exactly know how that communication channel travels. But however it does, he does find out about the Underground Railroad, finds out about the opportunity to run away. And what is interesting is that we find out that he has two other older brothers who have also ran away as well. And what I like to tell folks on our tours is the idea of the scariness or riskiness of running away seems to be lessened if you know people who have already, frankly, may have made it, because you don't ever know, but they haven't come back, right? They've run away and not come back. So you believe in your heart of hearts that they haven't been captured and they've been able to make it. And so now you believe that you can make it as well. And so, however he finds out, he does take the step to running away. Historians believe from Alexandria it would have taken anywhere from 6 days to about 2 weeks, depending on a number of factors, for someone like him to make it to Philadelphia. And once he makes it to Philadelphia, he does meet with William Still. But then after that, his trail goes cold. We don't know if he stays in Philadelphia. We don't know if he travels further or travels outside to other places in Pennsylvania. The only lasting piece of information we know is this slave advertisement. Because, of course, you're going to have owners that want to try to get the enslaved back. And in particular, if you have rented out someone else's slave, you're going to have an extra motivation to try to track that person down. And that's what we see a little bit in this slave advertisement. With a number of our slave advertisements, you usually don't have $200 being that's probably a higher level of money that's usually put out as a reward. Usually $100, $150 is right around what we see. But if you borrowed or rented out someone else's property, you're going to be willing to put a little extra money into trying to get that back. And as we assume, he's never captured, and so most likely he has to pay the full price for having had the enslaved run away. One of the interesting things we do see at the bottom of this is we see the name T.D. Findle. You may recognize that last name from the Findle house, and he is indeed connected with the family. We believe this might be a situation where TD wants to be a supporter of the school, and so he's putting up his money instead of having the school put up his money or the rector put up his own personal money for this. We see that all the time today in different ways. You have the college athletic system. You have boosters that get involved with supporting the school, and this in a way is similar to that if you want to make a comparison. One of the interesting things that I found is that you have a lot of activity on the 500 block of Cameron Street here in Old Town. There are, I want to say, 3 different stories, and ends up being about 5, 6 individuals that are able to run away within a 2 or 3 year period. And it's not too surprising that this is part of the a little too early, but this is not too surprising because we find out that there are a number of Quakers that own property on Cameron Street. And from what we know, the Quakers are the most involved group of individuals in early Alexandria with not only the Underground Railroad, but publicly with anti-slavery work. They are going to make up the large majority of an 1827 benevolent society here in Alexandria. It's called the Alexandria Benevolent Society for the Amelioration and Improvement of People of Color. And their focus is trying to push back against slavery in any way they can. There's actually a copy of an 1827 op-ed that they do in the Alexandria Gazette. And in that op-ed, they're basically complaining about the hypocrisy that we have in our country and our city around the issue of slavery. Because about 2 decades before, we have declared international slavery illegal. So the triangle trade or the slave trade, we've said as a country that that's not right. But in its place, the domestic slave trade has popped up. And so they're questioning kind of how we would say this thing is wrong, but this similar thing is not. And they're doing that type of work, trying to talk to the community. They're also taking their plight to Congress. In 1828, there are about 1,000 signatures of individuals that they send to Congress asking for the end of slavery. Obviously, it doesn't work, but that's the type of work that they're doing. And so you have these individuals that are highly involved publicly with kind of anti-slavery efforts. But secretly, very quietly, they're also involved with the Underground Railroad. And so that leads us to another story from Cameron Street, the story of Oscar and Joseph Ball. Oscar Ball and his stepbrother Joseph actually live in 505 Cameron Street. And as you all know, the beauty of having a historic district is that that house is still there. And we find out a woman named Mary Elizabeth Gordon is the owner of the home. She's actually inherited the home from her father, who's a wealthy businessman here in the city. And with it, she's also inherited 9 enslaved individuals. Now, if you walk past 505 Cameron, you will see that it probably is not the size that you would want to have of a house if you had 10 individuals living in the house. As Old Town homes are, not necessarily wide, but very deep. But again, not necessarily the size of a home that you would want to have for that many people. And so we actually believe 2 of the enslaved actually live in a different house around the corner. But she still has 8 people in that home, including herself. And Oscar's the oldest of those that she owns. He started with her when he was about 6 or 7, but now he's in his mid-20s. And he has realized that while she is, and this is what he says to William Still, she's not a bad or abusive owner, but he is worried about her nephew. And as she grows older, something could happen to her where her nephew takes ownership, and he is said to be abusive. So he wants to get out of that situation, that possible future situation. And so he actually approaches her and asks how much it would cost to buy his freedom. We do know that that is a process that is available, depending on the owner, in that day. The manumission process. It's no accident that that's the name of the company. But the manumission process is something we've heard of, but we've never heard of it in that terms. How many folks have heard of the term manumission? Okay, hopefully it's not everybody. Good. All right. How many folks have heard of the term freedom papers when it comes to the enslaved, right? That's what a manumission is, the legal term for freedom papers. We don't use it, obviously, nowadays, but that's what it is. And so he is hoping to give her a certain amount of money to have a manumission paper. And the thing I love to bring up to groups is, now let's think about this. He's an enslaved man. He does not have a regular job, regular income. How could he have any income? As we already mentioned, many owners have the ability to rent out their enslaved. And we know some owners in town, when they rent an enslaved person out, give the enslaved a portion of that money. And so it's actually what Oscar is hoping to do is be rented out, receive some income from that, and do that probably a number of times over a number of years. And then at the end of the day, have the amount of money that she needs to write him a manumission. They come to an understanding of $800 is the amount that she would need to write him a manumission. And in our dollars today, that's roughly around $25,000. So it's not a small amount of change. And so Oscar does start to look for opportunities to be rented out. But unfortunately, she actually comes back to him and changes the amount of money that she wants. Supposedly, she's been chatting with friends, and they convince her that the going rate for someone like him, regardless of how much time he's already spent with her, is $1,100. And so she comes back to him and changes that. As you can imagine, if you were in his shoes, you now understand that you really don't have leverage in this situation. And from this, we believe that he starts to look for other opportunities to run away. Again, with him being in the 500 block of Cameron Street, I believe that it's frankly only a matter of time until he interacts with someone who is a Quaker and involved in the Underground Railroad. To even put a finer point on it, there's a belief, and I believe in the 1850s, you actually have a Quaker meeting house at the corner of, it's going to be Pitt Street and King Street. And so that's about a block away from where he is. And so you're going to have Quakers in that general vicinity anyway. Again, we don't exactly know who he contacts, how he gets in touch with the Underground Railroad. We know that he leaves in 1857. And as you can see from the slave ad, he's not alone. A man named Montgomery Graham, who's one of the other enslaved individuals in the home, leaves with him. And we know that they join a caravan of about 8 other people that's already hiding out in Alexandria. And that, when I read that, that's really what sparked kind of something in me to say, hold on. If people are already hiding out here, it's not just stories from people that are coming from Alexandria. We are a stop on the Underground Railroad. That's big. People aren't just passing through the city, hopping on a boat, getting out of here. People are finding refuge here as well. So not only people leaving from Alexandria, people using Alexandria as a stop. And so we find that this is happening. These 2 men are able to join a caravan of fugitives, and they're able to escape the city. They make their way to Philadelphia, meet and interact with William Still, telling him their story, where they've come from, and etc. And then we luckily have more to that story. We know that the caravan continues north. They end up in upstate New York, in a small town called Oswego, New York. As some of you may know, it's on the banks of Lake Ontario. And for about 6 months, they find refuge there. I believe during that time, they also find out about the opportunity to go into Canada. By this time, the Canadian government has taken a hard stance against slavery. They no longer allow slavery within Canada. They did prior to that in the early 1700s. But by this time, in the 1850s, they've taken that hard stance against it, not only outlawing slavery, but also not allowing slave owners and slave hunters to come into Canada to retrieve fugitives. And so by all accounts, that's the closest place where you have, where enslaved or runaways would have government-protected freedom. They find out about this, and a majority of them decide to head to Canada because the United States has even tougher fugitive slave laws. The only 2 who don't leave, oddly enough, are these 2 men, Oscar Ball and Montgomery Graham. They stay in Oswego. We don't exactly know why, because it would make a lot of sense to just go into Canada. But while they're there, we find out that Oscar actually writes a letter to his brother. Interestingly enough, we find out that Oscar and his brother Joseph have been educated. And it's quite the interesting caveat to what we would think about Virginia law in that day. Because Virginia law does not allow African Americans to be educated, but it does not punish an owner for educating their own slaves for their own purposes. And so we find out Miss Gordon has done this. She's educated her slaves. They know how to read and write. And so Oscar can write a letter, and as we'll find out later, Joseph can too. And so he writes a letter back to his brother. We believe that goes through secret channels and gets back to his brother, letting him know that he's made it safely to upstate New York. And he challenges brother Joseph to run away as well. The bigger challenge for Joseph really is what comes next for him, because he has a much larger family than Oscar does. Oscar doesn't have anyone, but Joseph has a wife and 4 kids, 2 of whom who are probably very young. And to compound matters, Oscar's wife and kids do not live in Alexandria. They live in Loudoun County. I don't know about you, but I don't like driving to Loudoun County nowadays. And so imagine the 1800s, you don't have a car, your family is in a place far, far away. How are you going to get them and then escape to freedom? And that's a huge challenge. And so Oscar has a series of options. He can stay enslaved, and stay with what he knows. He can take a risk and run away by himself, leaving his family behind. You have a number of individuals who make that tough decision. Or he could try to get his family, and then all together make the daring escape north. It really takes him a year to figure out what he wants to do. But in 1858, he decides to run away, but he decides to run away by himself, leaving behind his wife and 4 kids. He joins a smaller group of individuals hiding out in Alexandria, only 2 others. And so their caravan of 3 heads to Philadelphia and makes it there successfully. connects again, as the process seems, with William Still to tell them their story. And then he makes his way up north, reconnects with his brother in Oswego, and they start to settle down and create a life for themselves. But if you're in Joseph's shoes, you can imagine the guilt you feel having finally found freedom, but being very worried about what happens with your family. So he actually writes a series of letters back to William Still, letting William Still know that he's made it to Oswego and he's found his brother and they have a home and they've started life, but also asking William Still if there's anything that can be done by the conductors and station masters of the Underground Railroad to get his wife and kids out of bondage. Interestingly enough, we find out that roughly 3 years later, the family is fully reunited in Oswego. In fact, the census records of that day in 1860 show that Joseph is living with a woman and 5 kids because they've decided to grow their family. And hopefully he hasn't found a random woman with 4 or 5 kids. But a number of historians have actually theorized about how this could be done. Obviously, we'll never exactly know, but it's a belief built on the idea that the conductors and station masters, people involved with the Underground Railroad, are extremists. They are very deeply concerned about slavery and what it's done to the United States, to their communities. And this is at a time when we're seeing across the world things changing. Again, let's not forget that England has outlawed slavery in 1830. And so we're here in 1850 as one of the few countries that still allows domestic slavery to take hold. And so academics and abolitionists are looking at that and questioning, why does that need to continue? And this group of Quakers have said, we're going to try to do something about it. We have stories where they have, and I'm not sure if this is in my slides, so I might not tell this. I don't want to get in trouble. We have stories where they have operated in different ways to get their result. And not all of those ways are legal. And so there's a belief that they basically trick the plantation owner where the family is being held into bringing almost 24 enslaved people up to Philadelphia to sell. Let's be honest, if somebody today approached you and said they were going to give you the full asking price of your car plus 50%, you'd probably think on that. You'd be like, well, maybe I can part with this car and buy another one, right? And so we believe that's what happened. Somebody gave them or propositioned him with an offer that was too good to resist. And when this grouping of enslaved people come to Philadelphia, members of the Underground Railroad kidnap many of them, many of the enslaved, and with specific intention, because they're kidnapping, making sure they kidnap the wife and the children, and then take them to reconnect them with their husband and their father in upstate New York. And so, this particular story is to me quite fantastic. One, you have a location that has multiple individuals escape within a year period. We find out Miss Gordon is very, very wealthy. I don't think I mentioned this. She is, in 1850, she's actually the largest non-business owning slave owner in Alexandria, frankly, just because she inherited so many individuals. We know many of the larger slave owners would have been merchants, tavern owners, businessmen. But she is one of the few that does not own a business and has a number of enslaved individuals. We also know that she's frankly independent and wealthy. We don't believe she's ever married, and she owns this house and a number of enslaved people. And so she's not wanting. And if you read into it, she's not only owned but knows these individuals and has known them for a number of years. From all accounts, historians believe she's not interested in chasing any runaways. We know that someone is, though, John T. Gordon. As you can probably imagine, that's the nephew. He's seeing these individuals leave, and he does not want to lose anything on his inheritance. And so he is trying to track anyone down that he can. And we believe he is not fruitful in that search. But this is one of the more involved escapes. I'll tell you about another one. And I think I did my slides out of order because I usually ask people about who Harriet Tubman is, and of course everybody knows who that is, and the work she does on the Eastern Shore. And we have a little bit of a connection to her and that work on the Eastern Shore. Because there's a man here in Alexandria named Joseph Vinny, or Joe Vinny. And his wife and kids live and are enslaved on a plantation in the Eastern Shore, in a similar area where Harriet Tubman lives and does her work. And Joseph has the opportunity to visit his wife and kids on a regular basis. And one of these occasions when he visits the plantation they're on, he finds out that they are planning to escape. They live on a very large plantation, has 400 plus acres, and there are about 30 enslaved individuals working that plantation where his wife and kids are. And all 30 are planning an escape, and a number of enslaved individuals right around that plantation are planning to escape with them. If your wife and kids said that they're planning to escape, Joe knows he would be a fool not to try to escape and join them. And so that's what he does. He plans his own escape here in Alexandria, is successful, and makes it back with them to try to escape. And so you have a number of individuals escape in one particular night. This picture is in William Still's book, but it actually doesn't really tell the truthful story about how their escape happens. As you can imagine, it would be not the smartest idea to escape down like this, right? And we know they don't. We know they actually are going to end up escaping in small groups, 2s and 3s and things like that throughout the night. And they're going to make their way all the way to Philadelphia. All 30 plus individuals escape and make it there. It's actually interesting, and I don't think I included this particular slave advertisement, but this is the slave advertisement that Samuel Pattinson, the owner of this plantation, publishes after he realizes that all of his slaves have left. Again, if you read that first sentence, a great stampede of slaves took place in Cambridge, Maryland. Again, that's not what happened. But put yourself in Samuel's shoes or his perspective. He does not know about the Underground Railroad. And so how else would his enslaved people escape? They most likely escape together. And so hopefully somebody's going to see this large congregation of slaves running down the road, right? Obviously we know that doesn't happen. How much time do I have?
We're close to wrapping. People
Okay.
are leaving to pick up kids or go to worship.
Okay, I can definitely wrap up the next part. All right, sorry, I can talk about these today. But interesting enough, so we find out that Samuel publishes a number of slave ads, obviously does not have a real idea of how the Underground Railroad works. And in another slave ad that I did not include, you actually find out that all but one enslaved person on his plantation left. And so you have one woman, and I can't remember her name right now, but you have one woman left over. He publishes his first ad, gets no takers on the ad because no one has seen a group of slaves running down the street. Publishes multiple ads with more details about the individuals, hoping that somebody comes back. But in one of those ads, he also makes a notation that this last woman who stayed after the group left has now left as well. Because of course, if you are the only one left on the plantation and all these people leave and they don't come back, you're like, hold on, this is possible, right? And so we know that they escaped with the help of the Underground Railroad. Joe Vinny is with them as well. And so with that, I will start to close it out. Does anybody have any questions?